I will never forget that evening when my life turned upside down. After a long, exhausting day at work, I returned home, looking forward to a cozy evening with Rachel. She always prepared something special for us, and I hoped tonight would be no different. However, as I opened the door, I was met with laughter that froze me in my tracks. It wasn't just any laughter, it was the unmistakable sound of Rachel and Dan, my best friend. A chill ran down my spine as I approached the door quietly. My heart racing with an unsettling mix of anticipation and dread. Peeking through the slightly ajar door, I saw them sitting on the couch, too close for comfort. Their eyes sparkled with a warmth that I had thought was reserved for me alone. At that moment, the reality of betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt as if the ground had been pulled from beneath my feet, leaving me suspended in disbelief. I had always trusted Dan, he was more than a friend, he was family. But now, here he was, sharing laughter and intimacy with my wife, the woman I had vowed to love and cherish. As I stood there, frozen in that agonizing moment, I replayed the memories of our life together. The late-night talks, the shared dreams, the laughter that once filled our home, all of it now felt like a cruel joke. The warmth of our love was replaced by a cold, harsh reality. I could hardly breathe, my chest tightening as the weight of betrayal settled over me like a heavy shroud. I quietly retreated from the door, my mind racing. How could this happen? What had I missed? The questions swirled around me, each one more painful than the last. I felt a fire ignite within me, fueled by the rage and heartbreak that threatened to consume me. I couldn't just stand by and let this betrayal go unpunished. I needed to take control of the situation, to reclaim my dignity in the face of this crushing humiliation. The days that followed were a blur of anger and sorrow. I watched Rachel and Dan from a distance, trying to piece together the fragments of their betrayal. Every laugh they shared felt like a dagger to my heart, each stolen glance a reminder of my shattered trust. I began to gather evidence, meticulously documenting their affair. I took photographs, saved messages, and even recorded their conversations when I could. Each piece of evidence was a reminder of my pain, but it also became a weapon I could wield against them. I spent sleepless nights plotting my revenge. I envisioned the moment when I would confront them, the look of shock on their faces when they realized I knew their secret. The thought of their humiliation brought me a twisted sense of satisfaction. I was determined to make them pay for the pain they had caused me. I imagined the power I would feel as I laid bare their deceit, watching as their world crumbled around them. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. I arranged to meet them at a cafe, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. I put on a mask of calm, determined to hide the storm brewing inside me. As I approached their table, I forced a smile, masking the turmoil within. They greeted me with casual banter, completely unaware of the storm about to break over their heads. After a few moments of small talk, I decided it was time to reveal my hand. I leaned in closer, my voice low but steady. "I know about you too," I said, watching as their faces drained of color. The shock was palpable, and for a brief moment, I reveled in their fear. I laid out the evidence I had gathered, each piece a testament to their betrayal. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the sound of their shallow breaths. I offered them a deal. I would keep their secret if they agreed to my terms. I felt a surge of power as I watched them squirm, realizing that I held their fate in my hands. But as they exchanged glances, I sensed a shift in the air. They weren't going to take this lying down. What unfolded next was a game of cat and mouse, each of us trying to outmaneuver the other. Rachel and Dan retaliated, threatening to expose my secrets, details from my past that I had buried deep. I was caught in a web of deceit, each of us holding the other's future in our hands. I felt the walls closing in around me, the very secrets I had used as a shield now becoming my greatest vulnerability. As the stakes escalated, I realized that this was no longer just about revenge. It was a battle for survival, a desperate attempt to protect myself from the fallout of our collective betrayals. I began to gather information on them, hoping to find something, anything, that could turn the tide in my favor. The game had changed, and I was determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. But as I delved deeper into their lives, I began to see the cracks in my facade. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and I found myself questioning my motives. Was I seeking justice, or was it merely a mask for my pain? The realization hit me hard: in this game of revenge, we were all losing. The tension mounted, and I felt the weight of our secrets pressing down on me. Each confrontation brought us closer to the edge, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. The path I had chosen was fraught with danger, and I was left to wonder if I would be able to bear the consequences of my actions. In the end, we were all trapped in a cycle of betrayal, and I could only hope that I would find a way to escape before it consumed us all. After witnessing the betrayal that unfolded before my eyes, a fire ignited within me, fueled by a potent mix of rage and heartbreak. I couldn't believe that Rachel, the woman I had shared my life with, could betray me in such a devastating way. The pain was overwhelming, a constant companion that followed me wherever I went. I found it increasingly difficult to function, my mind consumed by thoughts of revenge and retribution. As the days passed, I found myself sinking deeper into a dark abyss of anger and resentment. Every time I saw Rachel and Dan together, it was like a dagger to my heart. Their laughter, once a source of joy, now mocked me, reminding me of the shattered trust that lay between us. I knew I couldn't simply sit back and accept this betrayal. I needed to take action, to reclaim my power and restore my dignity. It was during those sleepless nights, when the pain was at its most acute, that I began to formulate my plan for revenge. I knew that I needed to gather evidence, to build a case that would leave no doubt about their infidelity. I started by meticulously documenting everything I could: photographs, text messages, even recordings of their conversations. Each piece of evidence was a painful reminder of the trust that had been broken. But it also became a weapon that I could wield against them. As I delved deeper into their affair, I began to uncover more and more incriminating details. I learned about their secret meetings, the lies they told to cover their tracks, and the lengths they went to keep their relationship hidden. The more I discovered, the more my anger grew, fueling my determination to make them pay for the pain they had caused. I spent countless hours poring over the evidence, piecing together a narrative that would expose their betrayal for all to see. I imagined the moment when I would confront them, the look of shock and fear on their faces as they realized that their secret was out. I pictured the humiliation they would feel as I laid bare their deceit, stripping away the facade they had so carefully constructed. But as I planned my revenge, I couldn't help but question my motives. Was I truly seeking justice, or was I simply consumed by a desire for retribution? The line between right and wrong began to blur, and I found myself questioning the morality of my actions. I knew that if I went through with my plan, there would be consequences not just for Rachel and Dan, but for myself as well. Despite my doubts, I couldn't shake the overwhelming need for revenge. I felt like a caged animal, trapped by the pain and humiliation of betrayal. I needed to break free, reclaim my power, and assert my dominance over those who had wronged me. The thought of Rachel and Dan suffering as I had suffered became an obsession, a driving force that consumed my every waking moment. As the plan began to take shape, I found myself becoming increasingly reckless. I took risks, pushed boundaries, and disregarded the potential consequences of my actions. I was consumed by a single-minded focus, blinded by the desire for retribution. I knew that I was walking a dangerous path, but I couldn't bring myself to turn back. The allure of revenge was too strong, too intoxicating to resist. In the end, I knew that there would be no going back. Once I set my plan in motion, there would be no turning back. I would have to see it through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. I steeled myself for the battle ahead, determined to emerge victorious, even if it meant sacrificing everything I held dear. The stakes were high, but in my mind, the potential rewards were worth the risk. I was ready to fight for my honor, to reclaim my rightful place in the world, even if it meant destroying those who had betrayed me in the process. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. I had spent countless hours preparing for this moment. And now it was time to confront Rachel and Dan. My heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread as I made my way to the cafe where we had agreed to meet. I had rehearsed every word and every gesture, and yet as I approached the entrance, I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me. Was I truly ready for what was about to unfold? As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee and pastries enveloped me, but it did little to calm my nerves. I spotted them at a corner table, their heads bent close together, sharing a laugh that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. They looked so comfortable, so at ease with one another, and the sight of it made my blood boil. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that was about to take place. "Hey, guys," I called out, forcing a smile onto my face as I approached their table. Rachel looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite reach her eyes. Dan, on the other hand, wore a mask of casual indifference. But I could see the tension in his posture. They both knew that something was off, and I reveled in the knowledge that I held the upper hand. We exchanged pleasantries, and for a moment, it felt like old times. We talked about trivial matters, but I could feel the weight of the unspoken truth hanging over us like a dark cloud. I could see the flickers of anxiety in their eyes, and it only fueled my resolve. I was in control now, and I intended to make the most of it. After a few minutes of small talk, I decided it was time to lay my cards on the table. I need to talk to you both about something important, I said, my voice steady but low. I watched as their expressions shifted, curiosity mingling with apprehension. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I know about your affair. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's face went pale, and I could see the color drain from Dan's cheeks. Their eyes locked onto mine, wide with shock and disbelief. It was a moment I had envisioned countless times, and yet the reality of it was even more satisfying than I had imagined. I felt a surge of power coursing through me, electrifying and intoxicating. I have proof, I continued, my voice firm. Text messages, photos, even recordings of your conversations. I've documented everything. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder filled with evidence, the weight of it a physical manifestation of the betrayal I had endured. I placed it on the table between us. Watching as their eyes darted toward it, fear etched on their faces. I'm not here to make a scene, I said, my tone measured. But I want you to understand the gravity of the situation. If this gets out, it will ruin both of your lives. Your careers, your reputations, everything you've built could come crashing down. I leaned back in my chair, allowing the weight of my words to sink in. This was my moment, and I intended to make the most of it. Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand to silence her. I'm not interested in your excuses or your apologies. What I want is simple. You will both do exactly as I say, and in return, I will keep your secret. I could see the gears turning in their minds, the realization that they were now at my mercy. What do you want? Dan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a tremor in his tone, and I could sense the fear radiating off him. It was a heady feeling, knowing that I had them cornered, that I held the power to dictate the terms of our new reality. I took a moment to consider my demands. I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal, and to understand the consequences of their actions. First, you will both end your relationship immediately. No more sneaking around, no more lies. You will go back to your lives as if nothing ever happened. I paused, allowing my words to sink in. Second, you will agree to meet with me regularly to discuss my conditions. I want to ensure that you're both staying in line. Rachel's eyes narrowed, and I could see the defiance bubbling beneath the surface. You can't control us, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. This is insane. I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. Oh, but I can. You see, the moment you chose to betray me, you forfeited your right to control your narrative. You're in this as deep as I am, and I will not hesitate to expose you if you step out of line. I could see the realization dawning on her, the understanding that I was serious. The fear in Dan's eyes only deepened as he processed the implications of my words. What if we refuse? Dan asked, his bravado faltering. It was a question I had anticipated, and I was ready with my answer. Then I will make sure that every detail of your affair is made public. I will contact your employers and your families, and I will ensure that everyone knows the truth about what you've done. Do you think you can just walk away from this? You're both sadly mistaken. I leaned back, crossing my arms, allowing the tension to build in the air around us. The silence that followed was thick with uncertainty. I could see their minds racing, weighing their options, and I knew that I had them right where I wanted them. They were trapped, and I was the one holding the keys to their freedom, or their destruction. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. Fine, we'll do what you want, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a resignation in her tone that sent a thrill of satisfaction through me. But you have to promise that you won't tell anyone. I nodded slowly, a smirk creeping onto my face. Of course, as long as you both keep your end of the bargain, your secret is safe with me. I could see the tension in their shoulders ease slightly, but I knew that this was just the beginning. They were now pawns in my game, and I intended to make the most of it. As we wrapped up our meeting, I felt a sense of triumph wash over me. I had successfully turned the tables on them, and I was now in control of my narrative. But beneath the surface, a nagging doubt began to creep in. I had crossed a line, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker journey. As I left the cafe, a mix of exhilaration and dread coursed through me. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, but I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and moral dilemmas. I had become the architect of my revenge, but at what cost? The weight of my actions loomed heavily over me, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was truly prepared for the consequences that lay ahead. The days that followed my confrontation with Rachel and Dan were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt a strange mix of triumph and anxiety, a cocktail of exhilaration and dread that coursed through my veins like a drug. I had successfully turned the tables on them, but I was acutely aware that this was just the beginning of a much darker journey. I had entered a dangerous game, one where the stakes were high, and the rules were constantly shifting. Rachel and Dan complied with my demands, at least for the time being. They went through the motions of their lives, but I could sense the tension that hung in the air between us. Our interactions were fraught with an undercurrent of fear and resentment, and I could see the cracks in their facade. They were walking on eggshells around me, and with each passing day, I felt the power I wielded over them grow stronger. It was intoxicating, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing with fire. I began to meet with them regularly, as per our agreement. Each meeting felt like a chess match, with me as the player and them as the pieces on the board. I would lay out my terms, and they would nod in compliance, but I could see the simmering resentment in their eyes. They were not content to be my pawns, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before they would attempt to reclaim their power. As the weeks passed, I started to notice subtle changes in their behavior. They became increasingly defiant, testing the boundaries I had set. It was as if they were waiting for the right moment to strike back, to reclaim their lives from the grip of my blackmail. I could see the tension building, and I knew that I had to remain vigilant. The last thing I wanted was to let my guard down and allow them to turn the tables once again. One afternoon, I received a text from Rachel asking to meet. My heart raced as I read her message, a mix of curiosity and apprehension flooding through me. I wondered what she could want to discuss. Had she decided to come clean? Was she finally ready to end this twisted game? I agreed to meet her at a small park near our neighborhood, a place that held memories of happier times. As I arrived at the park, I spotted Rachel sitting on a bench, her posture tense and her expression guarded. She looked up as I approached, and I could see the flicker of determination in her eyes. I took a seat beside her, bracing myself for whatever was about to unfold. "Brad, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of anxiety. "This situation is getting out of hand. We can't keep living like this." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean? You're the one who agreed to my terms." "I know, but this isn't sustainable. We're all walking on eggshells, and it's only a matter of time before one of us snaps. You can't keep controlling us like this, Brad. It's not right." There was a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, and it both excited and unnerved me. "Right or wrong doesn't matter anymore, Rachel. What matters is that I have the upper hand, and I intend to keep it that way," I replied, my voice firm. I could feel the tension crackling between us, and I knew that this conversation could go either way. "But at what cost?" she pressed, her voice rising slightly. "You're not just hurting us, you're hurting yourself too. This isn't who you are." I felt a pang of guilt at her words, but I quickly pushed it aside. "You don't get to lecture me about who I am. You've betrayed me in the worst way possible, and now you want me to feel sorry for you?" My voice dripped with venom, and I could see her flinch at my words. Rachel took a deep breath, her composure wavering. "I'm not asking for your sympathy, Brad. I'm asking you to reconsider. We can find a way to move forward without this constant tension. We can work on rebuilding trust, but it has to start with honesty." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I was tempted to consider her proposal. Maybe there was a way to salvage our relationships, to find a path forward that didn't involve manipulation and deceit. But then I remembered the pain of betrayal, the way it had shattered my trust, and I felt the walls around my heart harden once more. "I don't trust you, Rachel. Not after what you did. This is the only way I can ensure that you and Dan don't betray me again," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "You need to understand that I'm not going to let my guard down. Not now, not ever." Rachel's expression shifted, and I could see the frustration boiling beneath the surface. You're only making things worse, Brad. This isn't going to end well for any of us. You're pushing us into a corner, and when people are cornered, they fight back. I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. The realization that they might retaliate was unsettling, but I quickly dismissed it. I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let them regain control. Let them try, I said defiantly. I'll be ready. As I left the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had underestimated Rachel and Dan. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals were dangerous. I needed to stay one step ahead of them, to anticipate their moves before they could make them. The game was far from over, and I was determined to come out on top. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on Rachel and Dan, watching for any signs of rebellion. I noticed that they were spending more time together, whispering and exchanging glances that spoke volumes. It was a subtle shift, but it was enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. I felt a growing sense of paranoia, convinced that they were plotting something behind my back. One evening, I decided to confront Dan directly. I arranged to meet him at a bar, a place where we had shared many laughs in the past. As I entered, I spotted him sitting at the bar, nursing a drink. He looked up as I approached, and I could see the tension in his posture. He knew why I was there. Brad, he said, his tone neutral but guarded. What's going on? I took a seat beside him, my gaze steady. I want to know what you and Rachel are planning. I can see the way you two are acting, and I won't tolerate any more deception. Dan's expression hardened, and I could see the flicker of defiance in his eyes. We're not planning anything, Brad. We're just trying to get through this mess you've created. Don't play games with me, Dan. I know you're both unhappy. You think I don't see the way you look at each other? The way you whisper when you think I'm not watching? My voice was low but intense, and I could feel the tension crackling between us. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I get that you're hurt, but this is not the way to handle it. You can't keep holding this over our heads forever. It's not healthy for any of us. Healthy? Do you think this is about being healthy? You both made your choices and now you have to live with the consequences, I shot back, my anger rising. You don't get to dictate the terms of this situation. I do. Dan's eyes narrowed, and I could see the frustration boiling beneath the surface. You're playing a dangerous game. Brad, you think you're in control, but you're not. You're just pushing us closer to the edge. The tension between us was palpable, and I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. I knew he was right. I was walking a tightrope, and one misstep could lead to disaster. But I couldn't show weakness. I had to maintain my grip on the situation, no matter the cost. Let me make this clear, Dan. I will do whatever it takes to protect myself. If you and Rachel think you can turn the tables on me, you're sorely mistaken. I've already lost too much, and I won't let you take anything else from me, I said, my voice cold and unyielding. As I left the bar, I felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. I had asserted my dominance, but I knew that the battle was far from over. Rachel and Dan were not going to back down easily, and I had to be prepared for their retaliation. The stakes were high, and I was caught in a web of deceit and betrayal that threatened to consume us all. In the days that followed, I found myself consumed by paranoia. I began to see shadows lurking in every corner, convinced that Rachel and Dan were plotting against me. I started to second-guess every interaction, every word spoken, fearing that they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The tension was suffocating, and I could feel the walls closing in around me. I knew I had to regain control of the situation before it spiraled out of my grasp. I began to gather more evidence, digging deeper into their lives, hoping to find something that would give me the upper hand once again. I followed them, watched their interactions, and listened for any whispers of rebellion. I was determined to stay one step ahead, to anticipate their moves before they could make them. But as I delved deeper into their lives, I began to realize that I was becoming the very thing I despised. I was consumed by jealousy and anger, and the lines between right and wrong were blurring. I had set out to reclaim my power, but in the process, I was losing a part of myself. The darkness that had taken root within me was growing, and I knew that I had to find a way to break free before it consumed me entirely. As the tension mounted, I felt the weight of my actions pressing down on me. I had become trapped in a cycle of revenge and betrayal, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. I had to make a choice, continue down this dark path or find a way to break free and reclaim my life. But as I looked into the abyss, I couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late to turn back. As the days turned into weeks, the tension between Rachel, Dan, and me continued to escalate. What had begun as a calculated plan for revenge had morphed into a complex web of deceit, manipulation, and fear. I felt as though I was living in a pressure cooker, the heat rising steadily, threatening to explode at any moment. The stakes were higher than ever, and I knew that I had to tread carefully. The balance of power was precarious, and I could sense that Rachel and Dan were growing increasingly restless under the weight of my control. I had successfully kept their affair a secret, but I could see the toll it was taking on all of us. Rachel was a shadow of her former self, her vibrant spirit dimmed by the constant fear of exposure. Dan, too, seemed to be struggling under the burden of our twisted arrangement. I could see the flickers of resentment in their eyes, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before they would attempt to reclaim their power. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't allow myself to show weakness. I had to remain vigilant, to anticipate their every move. One evening, I decided to confront Rachel once more. I arranged to meet her at a quiet diner, a place where we had shared many happy memories before everything had fallen apart. As I sat in a booth, waiting for her to arrive, I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over me. The smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air, and for a fleeting moment, I was transported back to a time when our lives were uncomplicated and filled with love. But that time felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the darkness that had taken root in our lives. When Rachel arrived, she looked weary, her eyes heavy with unspoken burdens. I gestured for her to sit, and as she slid into the booth across from me, I could see the tension etched on her face. "Brad," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk about what's happening between us. This can't go on forever." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "What do you mean? You're the one who agreed to my terms. If you want to end this, you know what will happen." "I know," she replied, her voice trembling. "But living in fear is not a life worth living. We're all suffering, and I can't keep pretending that everything is okay. I want to find a way to move forward, to heal, but I can't do that while you're holding this over our heads." Her words struck a chord within me. I had become the very thing I despised, a manipulator. A puppet master pulling the strings of their lives. The realization weighed heavily on my conscience, and I felt a pang of guilt for the pain I had caused. But I quickly pushed those feelings aside. I couldn't afford to show weakness now. "I'm not the one who betrayed you, Rachel. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences," I said, my voice cold. "If you want to move forward, you need to understand that I'm not going to let my guard down. Not now, not ever." Rachel's expression shifted, a mix of frustration and sadness crossing her features. "You're right, I did make my choices. But I'm asking you to reconsider. We can find a way to work through this without resorting to blackmail. We can be honest with each other." I felt the walls around my heart begin to crack, but I quickly steeled myself against her plea. "Honesty? After everything that's happened? I can't trust you, Rachel. Not anymore." As the conversation continued, I could see the desperation in her eyes. She was pleading with me to see reason, but I was too far gone, consumed by my desire for revenge. I had built my walls high, and I wasn't ready to let anyone in. The fear of being hurt again loomed large, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I let my guard down, I would lose everything once more. The tension between us reached a breaking point, and I could feel the air crackling with unspoken words. "Brad, please," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to live like this. I want to find a way to heal, but I need you to meet me halfway." I could see the tears welling in her eyes, and for a moment, I was tempted to relent. But the memories of betrayal flooded my mind, and I hardened my heart. "I can't, Rachel. I won't." As I left the diner that night, I felt a mix of anger and regret swirling within me. I had pushed her away, and in doing so, I had lost a piece of myself. The darkness that had taken root in my heart was growing, and I knew that I had to find a way to break free before it consumed me entirely. In the days that followed, I became increasingly paranoid. I watched Rachel and Dan closely, convinced that they were plotting against me. I could see the way they exchanged glances, the way they whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. It was a constant reminder that I was not in control, and the thought sent a chill down my spine. One evening, I decided to follow them. I parked my car a few blocks away from their apartment and waited, my heart racing with a mix of anxiety and determination. I needed to know what they were up to see if they were truly planning to turn the tables on me. As the sun began to set, I saw them leave together, their bodies close as they walked down the street, deep in conversation. I followed them at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. They walked to a nearby bar, a place I had never been but had heard them mention before. I parked my car and approached the entrance, my pulse quickening as I stepped inside. The dim lighting and loud music created an atmosphere of chaos, and I felt a sense of unease wash over me. I scanned the room, my eyes searching for Rachel and Dan. When I finally spotted them at a corner table, my heart sank. They were laughing together, their bodies leaning in close as they shared drinks. The sight of them together ignited a fire of jealousy and rage within me, and I felt my fists clench at my sides. As I watched them, I could see the way they interacted. There was a familiarity between them that made my stomach churn. They were no longer just two people caught in a web of betrayal. They were allies, united against me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I knew that I had to act quickly before it was too late. I approached their table, my heart racing as I prepared to confront them. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Rachel and Dan looked up, surprise etched on their faces. "Brad," Rachel said, her voice tinged with fear. "What are you doing here?" "I followed you," I replied, my gaze locked on Dan. "I wanted to see what you two were up to. Are you plotting against me?" Dan's expression hardened, and I could see the tension in his posture. "We're not plotting anything, Brad. We're just trying to enjoy a night out. You need to back off." "Back off?" I echoed, incredulous. "You think I'm just going to stand by while you two pretend like everything is normal? I know what you're doing, and I won't let you take control again." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. "You're the one who's out of control, Brad. This isn't healthy for any of us. You're pushing us away, and if you keep this up, you're going to lose everything." Her words struck a nerve, and I felt a surge of panic rise within me. I couldn't let them see my fear, couldn't let them know how close I was to losing everything I had fought for. "You think I'm afraid of losing you? You've already betrayed me once. I won't let it happen again." As the confrontation escalated, I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me. The anger, the fear, the desperation, it was all too much to bear. I had become trapped in a cycle of revenge and betrayal, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. At that moment, I realized that I had to make a choice. I could continue down this dark path, consumed by anger and resentment, or I could find a way to break free and reclaim my life. But as I looked into the eyes of Rachel and Dan, I couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late to turn back. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I had become a prisoner of my own making, trapped in a web of deceit and betrayal that threatened to consume us all. As I stood there, facing the consequences of my actions, I knew that I had to find a way to break free before it was too late. The question was, how? In the end, all of our secrets came to light, and the consequences were devastating. Rachel and Dan ended their relationship, but it brought me no satisfaction. I was left alone, with a sense of emptiness and loss that threatened to consume me. I realized that revenge brought no happiness, only more pain and suffering. I had lost not only my wife but my best friend as well. Now, I had to rebuild my life from the ashes of betrayal, learning to forgive and move forward. I understood that sometimes it's better to let go than to cling to what has already been lost. As I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my shattered life, I couldn't help but reflect on the choices that had led me to this point. The anger, the jealousy, the thirst for revenge, it had all consumed me, blinding me to the damage I was causing not only to Rachel and Dan but to myself as well. I had become a shadow of my former self, a hollow shell driven by a need for retribution that had ultimately left me empty and alone. The days that followed were a blur of pain and regret. I watched as Rachel and Dan went their separate ways, the weight of their betrayal and my actions hanging heavy between us. I wanted to reach out, to apologize, to find a way to make amends. But the words caught in my throat. The trust that had once bound us together had been shattered beyond repair, and I knew that there was no going back. As I tried to piece my life back together, I found myself constantly second-guessing my decisions. Had I gone too far? Had I crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? The guilt ate away at me, a constant companion that followed me wherever I went. I had become a prisoner of my own making, trapped in a web of deceit and betrayal that I had woven myself. Amid my turmoil, I realized that I needed to find a way to break free. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of my past mistakes, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I needed to find a way to forgive myself, to move forward, and to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. It was a slow and painful process, but with the help of a therapist and the support of a few close friends, I began to heal. I learned to let go of the anger and resentment that had consumed me, to forgive those who had wronged me, and to forgive myself for the choices I had made. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I felt like giving up, but I knew that I had to keep fighting if I ever wanted to find peace. As the months passed, I began to see the world in a different light. The darkness that had once clouded my vision had lifted, and I could see the beauty that surrounded me. I started to appreciate the small things in life, the moments of joy and connection that I had once taken for granted. I realized that true healing came not from revenge, but from letting go and embracing the present. In the end, I knew that I would never be the same person I was before the betrayal. The scars would always be there, a reminder of the pain I had endured and the lessons I had learned. But I also knew that I was stronger for it, more resilient, and more compassionate than I had ever been before. I had faced the darkness within myself and emerged on the other side, a better and more whole person for it. As I looked back on the events that had unfolded, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for the relationships that had been lost. Rachel and Dan had been an integral part of my life, and their absence left a hole that could never be filled. But I also knew that it was time to let go, to move forward, and to embrace the future that lay ahead. In the end, the aftermath of our betrayal was a stark reminder that no one wins in a game of revenge. We had all lost something precious, something that could never be replaced. But it was also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of forgiveness and the possibility of healing, even in the face of the most devastating of circumstances. As I stepped out into the world, ready to embrace a new chapter in my life, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The road ahead would not be easy, but I knew that I was ready to face it head on. I had learned the hard way that true strength comes not from holding onto the past, but from letting go and embracing the future. And with that knowledge firmly in my grasp, I knew that I would be able to navigate whatever challenges lay ahead.